Welcome back to Unfornicated Files Declassified, the series where we crack open the vault, torch the redactions, and drag the truth kicking and screaming into the daylight. Now, since I've been tackling conspiracies on social media, people have often asked me, what conspiracies do you believe? Or what government narratives do you question? Because they assume it's none. Well, this episode is the answer to those questions, but with a caveat. I'm not just some outsider shouting at the system. I was in the system. I served in the U.S. as part of the U.S. Navy SIGINT apparatus. And my rating was a CTO2, as you can see here on the screen. I was a cryptologic technician specializing in communications, which meant my daily work revolved around the very signals and communications that tell this story. My job was to encrypt, send classified messages, and make sense of signals that never lied, even when politicians did. I know how military intelligence works. I know what gets flagged and what gets buried and what gets scrubbed when it's politically inconvenient. So when I say that the official story of the USS Liberty doesn't hold water, I'm not speaking from speculation. I'm speaking from experience and evidence. And I'm not just questioning a government narrative to question a government narrative. I'm calling out a decades-long silence that cost Americans their lives and buried the truth under layers of classified excuses. So this isn't a theory. In my opinion, it's betrayal. And it starts here. In 1967, during the Six-Day War, a U.S. Navy ship was strafed, torpedoed, and left in flames by America's closest ally in the Middle East. The official story, a simple case of mistaken identity. Wrong ship, wrong flag, wrong everything. But 34 Americans died, 171 more were wounded, and the story hasn't added up since day one. So June 8th, 1967, the USS Liberty was conducting SIGINT operations in international waters off Sinai. This wasn't a stealth vessel, as you can clearly see. It was clearly marked. It had a U.S. flag, and it was an unarmed recon ship. This ship was built to intercept signals, not trade gunfire. But fight it did, or rather, it was forced to endure a fight. It was attacked by Israeli Mirage jets and torpedo boats. They hit it with napalm, blasted it with a torpedo, and raked it with machine gun fire for over 25 damn minutes. The casualties were naval and civilian cryptologists. I mean, think about that. These were intelligence specialists, not frontline combat troops. The only reason that that ship didn't sink to the bottom of the Mediterranean is simple. It was a heroic damage control crew that refused to go quietly. They fought fires, shored up bulkheads, and kept that vessel afloat while under relentless attack. And after all that, they expect us to believe it was a simple error in identification. Now, their actual official bullshit excuse, we thought it was Egyptian. They specifically claimed it was the Egyptian ship El Qasir, which, by the way, was a literal horse transport. So why is this bullshit? The El Qasir was 275 feet long, half the size of the Liberty. No antenna arrays, no radar domes, no naval profile whatsoever. Just a rust bucket for hauling livestock, supposedly outfitted with 3-pound guns for shelling the shoreline. It's like mistaking a surveillance plane for a hay cart with wings. Now, Israel says they didn't see the U.S. flag. Fog of war, high tensions, accidents happen. Accidents happen. Because 455 feet of antennas, the bold GTR-5 painted in the distinctive U.S. Navy paint scheme of white hole numbers with black shadows on haze gray paint screams Egyptian livestock barge. Give me a break. We're talking about a highly sophisticated intelligence vessel, bristling with communications gear, unmistakably American. And to confuse that with a glorified stable ship, that's an insult to anybody with eyeballs. But let's get into the shit that just doesn't add up. Recon flyovers before the attack. Israeli planes flew directly over Liberty multiple times for several hours before the attack. Now, these weren't quick, distant passes. They were low and close enough for the Liberty crew members to count the rockets and see the pilots, but they were unable to see any national identification markings on the planes. The crew waved. Photographs were taken. The ship's markings and U.S. flag were clearly visible. The positive ID should have been a goddamn certainty. The Liberty even sent a message to Task Force 60 Command, which it was a part of, notifying them of the observation. This wasn't a fleeting glance. It was a sustained observation. And the ship was identified. Declassified NSA and CIA documents suggest Liberty's identity was known. So this isn't just speculation. Israeli communications reportedly referenced an American flag during the attack. And Israel admitted as much during their own investigation, if you want to call it that, but we'll address that in a minute. We've got the transcripts. You can hear them asking. GTR-5 is written on that. Does that mean anything? And then we request that you make another pass and check once more if this is really an American flag. Oops. This is what we call an explicit on-the-record acknowledgement of an American vessel. And in case anyone still clings to the idea that this was some hasty, panicked error, let's talk about the damage that the USS Liberty sustained. The U.S. Navy damage report counted 821 shell holes in Liberty's outer hull. That's 821 holes from aircraft strafing runs. These are not ricochets, not shrapnel, since those were separate impacts. We're talking about direct hits from armor-piercing rounds from multiple 30-millimeter cannons. You can see the holes in the pictures as far as what the damage was. This kind of firepower doesn't happen by accident, and it sure as hell doesn't happen from a single flyby. But let's do the math that the IDF apparently skipped in their investigation. The Mirage 3, the jet Israel says carried out the initial strike, it's equipped with two DEFA 30-millimeter cannons, each holding 125 rounds each. That's 250 rounds per plane. But they said only two planes made the mistaken identity. So two Mirages, that gives you a ground total of 500 rounds. And yet there was 821 confirmed hits. So let's let that sink in for a minute. That means either A, they brought in more aircraft than reported. B, the pilots stopped off mid-attack to reload mid-air with a flying camel ferry. Or C, the official story is mathematically full of shit. But it gets worse. To deliver 821 cannon impacts, those Mirages would have needed to fire nearly every round with pinpoint accuracy. This was real-world strafing, where hit rates are much lower due to angle, movement, and turbulence. Even the best pilots miss under combat stress, especially from a moving platform targeting a ship in motion. So if 821 rounds landed, thousands were likely fired. which means multiple aircraft, multiple passes, and zero plausible deniability. But guess what? Strafing runs happen at close range, 300 to 800 meters. That's close enough to count rivets, let alone spot the 6-foot-tall hold numbers that say GTR-5 and a U.S. flag flapping in the breeze while under 5 knots of wind. You don't fire from that range unless you've got a visual target confirmation. And if they had a visual confirmation for every strafing pass, then they had repeated confirmation that they were firing on an American ship over and over and over. And this is where it truly gets insidious, a report of radio jamming. According to survivors, U.S. distress frequencies were being jammed. Not wideband jamming, not random, but a constant key being sent out. They actively blocked the Liberty's exact distress frequencies in real time. This wasn't battlefield confusion. It was a precision blackout, planned, targeted, and timed to cut Liberty off from the world. That's forethought. Coincidence? Bullshit. Try deliberate sabotage wrapped in static. They wanted to ensure no calls for help got out, no warnings were issued, no rescue was initiated quickly. After all, everyone in the area knew the nearest U.S. Navy aircraft carrier was 1,500 nautical miles west of the Liberty's position. At flank speed, which is approximately 30 knots, the USS America would have taken 48 hours to reach the Liberty station. Even with aircraft on alert, the Liberty had no combat air patrol assigned, and no carrier aircraft were launched to assist during the attack, due to a mix of confusion, communication breakdowns, and White House Pentagon level decision. Now, while the attack started with jets, it continued when the torpedo boats arrived, and with them, 6 launched torpedoes. One passed 75 yards astern or behind the Liberty, 5 others were duds, and one hit the Liberty amidships, just below the waterline in the cryptologic spaces. And then these torpedo boats circled the ship at close range, machine gunning anyone who came on deck. I mean, think about that. You're attacking a supposedly mistaken identity ship, and then you target anyone who came out on deck to help with damage control efforts in the attempt to keep the ship afloat. But that isn't even the worst of it. The most sickening part, according to Captain Ward Boston, who was the senior counsel to the U.S. Navy Court of Inquiry for the USS Liberty, was a testimony that it made clear that the Israelis intended there to be no survivors. Not only did the Israelis attack the ship with napalm, gunfire, and rockets, Israeli torpedo boats machine gunned 3 lifeboats that had been launched by the crew to save the most seriously wounded. That constitutes as a war crime. And the survivors say this wasn't a mistake that ended quickly. It was sustained, deliberate attack, a cold-blooded attempt to finish the job. So we're expected to believe they missed the giant American flag, but hit everything else with sniper precision. That's an insult to intelligence and the dead. Let's stop pretending this was just a blunder and ask the uncomfortable question. If it wasn't an accident, what the hell was it? And the motives are still debated 40 years later, but the theories are chilling. Theory 1 is that prevent the Liberty from intercepting communications about an upcoming operations in Sinai or into Lebanon. The Liberty was a SIGINT ship. It was designed to listen. They knew Liberty could intercept everything from troop movements to encrypted operations. If Israel was planning something, it didn't want America hearing. Theory 2, sink the ship, blame Egypt, and drag the U.S. into the war. So let's imagine that scenario. An American ship gets sunk, falsely attributed to an enemy, providing the evidence to pull the U.S. fully into the conflict. A horrifying prospect. And it wouldn't have been the first time. Think the Gulf of Tonkin, just 3 years earlier, a dubious incident that escalated us into Vietnam. False flags weren't science fiction, they were foreign policy. I mean, hell, just ask the ghosts of the USS Maine or the ghost that never made it home from Vietnam. Manufactured outrage has always been a favorite opening act. After all, public opinion and support goes a long way. Theory 3, panic. Maybe Liberty intercepted sensitive back-channel communications, military operations, intelligence sharing, maybe even U.S. sanctioned activities they didn't want public. If exposed, it could have nuked diplomatic credibility on both sides. Maybe the ship was observing something that would expose covert activities or agreements that neither side wanted made public, since the UAR is already accusing them of that in public already. And then there's the Cold War politics. The LBJ administration buried this shit to protect U.S.-Israeli relations. No punishment, no war crimes trial, just a diplomatic sweep under the diplomatic rug. Let's all move on. Nothing to see here. Yeah, let's move on from 34 dead Americans. It's a crock of shit. The geopolitical calculus of the time apparently outweighed justice for American sailors. So, if there wasn't an accident, just what the hell was it? It was a buffet of precision blackout, political calculus, and plausible deniability served cold. And in case you think this is all armchair speculation, let's hear from the National Security Agency director at the time, Lieutenant General Marshall Carter, a man who literally oversaw the world's most powerful intelligence agency. When asked about the misidentification excuse during his 1977 House Intelligence Committee testimony, his response was not vague or political. It was blunt. How blunt? Well, he said it couldn't be a mistake. There's just no way you could have a mistake there. So, translation? He called bullshit from the rooftop at Fort Meade, Maryland. And he continued his unwavering rejection of the IDF's explanation in well-documented and multiple classified sources. In a 1988 interview, he stated very plainly, it couldn't be anything else but deliberate. There's just no way you could have a series of circumstances that would justify it being an accident. Now, this statement came years after the incident, but it still carried the weight, at least with me and the public, of his position as the NSA director from 1965 to 1969, making it one of the most damning institutional rebukes to date. And he was not alone. This was also confirmed by the NSA Deputy Director, Louis Tordella. Oh, and we have one more. In fact, Richard Helms, then the director of the CIA and an intelligence rival of the NSA, also shared the following in his own reflections. There could be no doubt that the Israelis knew exactly what they were doing in attacking the Liberty. So let's get this straight. The NSA, CIA, and Liberty's own survivors all agree that this wasn't a fog of war accident, but a direct hit, wrapped in a diplomatic muzzle. But wait, survivors? People who were actually there and survived to tell their stories and version of events. Yes. Of the 294 crew originally on board the USS Liberty, there were 260 survivors. And they have spoken out for decades. Their testimony has been consistent, and so has their rage. They lived through this nightmare and have been fighting for truth ever since. Guys like Captain William McGonigal, who won the Medal of Honor for keeping the ship afloat, but was handed his Medal of Honor in secret, behind closed doors, without the president, without a parade, and without press coverage. This is the highest award ever awarded in the military, and it was hidden because Washington was already scrubbing the crime scene. The files aren't whispering. They're standing on a pile of bodies and yelling, "We fucking knew." Analysts at the NSA knew it. The ambassador to Lebanon knew it. Anyone not actively trying to choke the truth knew it. This was no accident. 50 years later, and the best we've gotten is a diplomatic shrug and a check for $80 million in today's money. No admissions, no accountability, just a redacted memory and a boot to the faces of those who lived it. So how do you keep a crime this obvious buried for half a century? That's easy. You don't hide the evidence. You just smear the people who talk about it. They call it a conspiracy theory. It's tossed around a lot. It's like intellectual bug spray meant to shut down discussions, not start it. Some use it as in, it's a coincidence, not a conspiracy. Mention the USS Liberty in certain circles and you'll hear, oh, that's been debunked. That's just some old conspiracy theory. Or something. This story doesn't come from fringe blogs or anonymous whistleblowers. It comes from declassified NSA and CIA reports. It comes from intercepted radio communications, naval deck logs, eyewitness accounts from the men who bled on that deck. Call it what you want, but it's not a theory when you've got 17 pages of declassified timestamps, autopsies, and enough receipts to bankrupt a lie. Or better yet, call it what it is. A paper trail soaked in blood and buried unclassified for 40 fucking years. In this case, the Cold War was the cover story, but the real objective? Rig the narrative before the truth ever had a chance, making sure the only acceptable version of the truth was one that kept Washington's hands clean. And if you're wondering how Israel spun its own story, well, they investigated it themselves. The Ramrod Report and Yerushalmi Commission are still floated as proof of innocence. But let's break that down. No U.S. personnel were allowed to testify. In fact, all the witnesses are highlighted on the screen. And not a single Liberty survivor was interviewed. That's a diplomatic magic trick, the kind where the truth disappears and accountability gets sawed in half. When the accused controls the investigation, you don't get answers. You get a script. And in this case, it was written in ink, redacted in black, and signed in blood. Do you know what is a conspiracy? Threatening survivors with court-martial if they speak out. Sanitizing reports to protect diplomatic relations, burying evidence for decades behind classified stamps. You don't need a theory when the evidence was filed in triplicate, stamp classified, and buried deeper than the accountability it erased. Hell, it took FOIA lawsuits to pry the truth loose. And when the documents came out, they didn't vindicate the official story. They shredded it. So let's be clear. If you still think conspiracy theory is a magic phrase that makes all this go away, you're not defending the truth. You're defending the silence. And if you're still reaching for the conspiracy theory panic button, go ahead and choke on it. This is based on official documents, intercepted transmissions, and the silence of 34 flag-draped coffins. Are you uncomfortable? You should be. Denying it doesn't make you a skeptic. It makes you complicit. This wasn't just a Cold War crime. It was a blueprint, a live fire demo of how truth gets buried when it's inconvenient. Fast forward to today, you have classified operations, narrative control, drone strikes, and sanitized press briefings, and friendly fire mishaps that get laundered through bureaucratic spin cycles. The USS Liberty isn't just a tragedy. It's a warning label. And if you don't call it what it was, then you signed off on the playbook they have never stopped using. The evidence is overwhelming. The cover-up has been exposed. Acknowledge it, admit it, and never let it happen again. This was never about confusion. It was about silence. And silence is policy's favorite weapon. We cracked the silence. We traced the transmission. We followed the paper trail through smoke, salt water, and classified ink. So now the question isn't what happened. It's why we were never told to ask. This has been Unfornicated Files Declassified. And remember, truth doesn't beg for permission. Stay uncensored, stay unapologetic, stay unfornicated.